Hello, I'm Emily Rhodes, and today I'm going to be talking to you about this book, which is the June pick for Emily's Walking Book Club, Loitering with Intent by Muriel Spark. I literally can't say the word Muriel without thinking about Muriel's wedding. Sorry, very different Muriel. So I'll begin. I'm actually going to begin by reading out the first line because one thing that I think is extremely Sparkian, as it were, is having a great opening to a novel. This, I think, is about the fourth, roughly, novel of hers I've read. Maybe it's the fifth. And all of them, when you start them, the first sentence, you're immediately in there and it's immediately kind of extraordinary, like slightly funny, slightly unexpected. She kind of always begins with a curveball. Anyway, this is the beginning of Loitering with Intent by Muriel Spark. One day in the middle of the 20th century, I sat in an old graveyard which had not yet been demolished in the Kensington area of London, when a young policeman stepped off the path and came over to me. So, okay, middle of the 20th century and we're in Kensington. I feel like this is real like Spark territory, even though she wrote this in the 80s. It's set in 1949 to 1950. And there's this weird kind of red herring of a policeman talking to her in a graveyard. Fleur Talbot, who is the narrator. And then actually it turns out to be just this funny kind of framing device, that what we come on to know is that for some reason this is the sort of the last day of that part of her life and the sort of turning point. And we find out what's gone on in the preceding 10 months, quite a precise time period, which leads up to this encounter with the policeman. Nothing actually happens with the policeman. They just have a conversation. I think she offers him a sandwich. It's sort of brilliant. It's so eccentric. So what has been going on up to this point? We learn that Fleur is a youngish woman, single-ish, and is writing. She's working really hard at becoming a writer, but she's also broke. Sort of broke, not in a dramatic way, just a bit strapped for cash, and she therefore quite practically needs to get a job. And her friend sort of suggests this job at the Autobiographical Association, which is run by this rather sinister, posh man, Sir Quentin Oliver. And Fleur is there. She kind of takes notes. I think she's officially the secretary, and edits these these memoirs by the esteemed members of this club who Sir Quentin has kind of cultivated to come in there. And meanwhile, she's sort of busy writing her own novel, Warren de Chase. And this slightly odd thing happens, which is that all these layers of books kind of muddle up and intermingle, intertwine, so that there's this extraordinary overlap between Fleur's novel that she's writing, Warren de Chase, the memoirs of these members of the Autobiographical Association, which Fleur herself edits, and then later on it transpires that Sir Quentin is sort of taking bits of Fleur's novel and kind of putting that into the novel. And also the events of Loitering with Intent itself. So there's this strange thing that she feels that she's kind of written this character, Warrender, who turns out to be very like Sir Quentin Oliver, and things happen in her book that happen in the events of the novel. And then on top of this, there's the kind of the mirroring of Muriel Spark's own life, and kind of elements that she drew on from her life that go into the novel. So it's a... Oh yeah, sorry, and on top of that, there are all these other books. So she quotes from Fleur quotes from this sort of famous memoir by Cellini, and also, oh God, I've written it down, some other book, Newman's Apologia, which is seen as these kind of great memoirs that are almost to be imitated by the members of the Autobiographical Association, and they're really inspiring to Fleur. And we also get a bit of Sir Quentin's diary. So there are all these books kind of mingling together in this kind of book soup, which is also weirdly a kind of life soup, because loads of these books are real lives or memoirs, or, you know, where is the line between real life and fiction when you're writing a memoir? So it's a very kind of complicated, fertile ground, I suppose, in which to explore loads of ideas. One of the ways that these books sort of overlap with each other and bleed into each other are these almost these refrains that come up a few times in the novel in different contexts. And I think one of my favourite refrain, in fact, yes, it's the final line, which comes from Cellini's memoir or autobiography, and it's sort of reiterated a few times in the book, and then it comes in right at the end. So having read you the first line of the book, I'm now going to read you the last line. She says, "And so, having entered the fullness of my years, from there, by the grace of God, I go on my way rejoicing." And for me, that is like the essence of the book, this rejoicing in life, this going on your way and being full of the joy of life. There's a tremendous spirit of playfulness in this book, and joy and sort of exuberance. And I say that feeling is there in spite of this feeling of kind of sinister oppression and things going wrong and life being quite tough. It's this paradox, I suppose, this nevertheless idea that I want to talk a little bit more about. So we began in a graveyard and we end with rejoicing. And I think that, for me, is almost the sort of central paradox of the book, that there's this presence of death throughout, this knowledge that death is coming. I'm not going to spoil it, don't worry, but for certain characters, death is coming, and you know, almost in a way, is death present even in the act of making a memoir? Are you sort of writing your memoir to preserve your life in the face of death, one could ask or argue. So we begin in a graveyard, death is there. I'm now thinking of one of Spark's other novels, Memento Mori, this idea that, you know, everybody gets this threatening phone call in this other book saying, you know, you're going to die. And saying that has made me think of Brideshead Revisited, you know, that sort of et in Arcadia ego, this idea that even in paradise, death is there. I am here. I'm not a Catholic, so I have probably got this wrong, and I'm sorry if I have, but I think that is quite a Catholic idea. I know Evelyn Waugh, who wrote Brideshead, was Catholic, and that's a very Catholic novel too. But this idea of death being there always, of always being aware of that in your life, and yet still managing to rejoice in life while being aware of oncoming death. I think that's quite a Catholic idea. Please tell me if I'm wrong. I definitely haven't quite got the nuance right, and I'm sorry for that. But I do think it's a really interesting thought, and I know, death sadly is something that we all have to cope with at some point. The death of a loved one, obviously that then makes us reflect on our own mortality. And it's strange. I certainly feel almost an instinct to not think about death. As you go about life, I'm always trying to sort of forget about it. And maybe for some people that is how to live, to live rejoicing in the everyday, not thinking about this sort of spectre of death coming for you. But here I think there really is a feeling of doing it differently, of being aware of the spectre of death. I feel this is a real Spark thing. In The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, she has these funny kind of, not funny, haha, but as in like unusual flash forwards where you see what's going to happen, some of the characters in the future, how they're going to meet their ends. And it's a very shocking moment when you're seeing them really as schoolgirls. So there's this feeling that death is coming at some point for everyone. We begin in a graveyard, and yet, nevertheless, we can rejoice in life. Maybe it's having death there that makes life so joyful and mischievous and playful and full of fun. And this nevertheless principle is something that Spark wrote about and is really known as being key to her work. I think she said it was prompted by growing up hearing, I'm definitely going to pronounce this wrong, nevertheless, said a lot, but pronounced as nevertheless. Is that right? Nevertheless. Do we have a Scottish expert here? And that is really key to her plots and her characters. Maybe, so if we think about Fleur, for instance, she's our kind of heroine, our protagonist. It's told from her perspective. Our narrator, as it were, we really empathise with her and we're with her. And, nevertheless, although we're rooting for her, she does do some things that are maybe a bit iffy. She's having an affair with her friend's husband. She's quite ruthless in situations. She's a contradiction. And I think there's a point in this book, am I going to get the right page? I think so, where Fleur, who of course is a writer like Spark herself, says, contradictions in human character are one of its most consistent notes. She says, I might as well remark here that to make a character ring true, it must be in some way contradictory, somewhere a paradox. I think that's such an interesting thought, in life and in writing. To think that every character only makes sense if you notice that paradox, that nevertheless thing about them. That they might be, a fantastic writer who only likes reading, doesn't like reading, or some sort of paradox there, or who kind of loves children but hates chocolate. I don't know. So some kind of paradox, and I think it's a really interesting way to think about character when you're creating it, when you're reading them, and also when you encounter people in life. What's their paradox? What's their nevertheless? So yes, I hope those are a couple of thoughts to leave you with. One, about this paradox of death and life and rejoicing in life coming alongside the knowledge of death in life, the Memento Mori there, and also this idea of paradox, another paradox being at the heart of character. There's really so much here in Loitering with Intent. I've really enjoyed reading it, and I'm really looking forward to discussing it with you this month. So for those of you who don't already know, we meet up on Zoom and for 2 walks every month. You don't come to all 3, you kind of pick one. And the walks are either in Regent's Park on a Friday lunchtime or on Hampstead Heath on a Sunday morning, and the Zooms are Monday evening. So hopefully one of those works for you. You can come along and join the discussion. But of course, if that doesn't work for you, you can always leave me a comment here, or sign up to the Substack, which is emily'swalkingbookclub.substack.com, and I send out an email every Monday with thoughts and links and things about the books. Can't wait to hear your thoughts on next book. Even got it here for July. Is going to be this, Persuasion by Jane Austen, a real classic. Thanks for joining me.